Hey, what's up, Called? My name is Landon. I'm one of the leaders here, and if this is your first time with us, we are so glad that you're here. We are ending our series tonight called Discover Your Story, and it's been a great series. Week one, we talked about how God is our author. God created us, He made us, and so what better person to be our author than God? Second week, we talked about how God can change your ending. That means that maybe you haven't grown up with God. Maybe you're just starting a relationship with God now. And so God hasn't been your author up until this point. That's okay because God can change your ending. He can change your story starting now. And last week, Logan did a great job talking about how we need to put God's desires, God's will over our own desires. And we need to really choose God above everything. And tonight we're wrapping up this series, kind of combining all 3 weeks and applying it to our life. See, we're talking about how we can share our story to bring God glory. Now, growing up, I always felt that I had a pretty boring story. Okay, like I didn't have one of those adventurous stories like some of my friends. I mean, some of my friends did crazy things. They went skydiving, they swam with sharks, they did some like pretty crazy ridiculous things. They had awesome epic stories. And I grew up and I didn't feel like I had any of that. I mean, my stories was just staying in my room doing my homework. Right? And I was like doing the things that I was supposed to do, and I felt like my goody two shoes story wouldn't reach anyone. And I don't know where you are. Maybe you relate with me. Maybe you feel like you have a boring story. Maybe you feel like you are that epic, go-getter, adventurous, cool storyteller. Maybe you feel like your story is shameful. Maybe you feel like you've made too many mistakes to share your story. Wherever you are, know this, that your story will reach the people God wants you to reach. See, I'll be able to reach people that you won't be able to reach, and you'll reach people that I will never be able to reach. And when we combined all of our stories, and when we combined our reach, we're going to be able to reach many people for God. And so tonight we're talking about how can we share our story to bring God glory. And we're going to be looking at a guy named Paul in the Bible. And Paul has his story, and his story is being rewritten by God. And he's having God rewrite his ending. And we're seeing that now he's going through some pretty tough stuff, right? He's going through some struggles. Someone say struggles. Yeah, he's going through some struggles. He's going through some tough things. And I think that's a common misconception. Like people think that when we give our lives to God and when God is our author, that means we are gonna have the most perfect story, that there's gonna be no problems, no issues, all happiness and rainbows. And that's simply not true. That there's still gonna be struggles, there's still gonna be problems, there's still gonna be hurts and heartaches in our story. And God may be writing those things. Maybe sometimes that's when we take the pen and we start writing those things in our story. But we're reading and we're going to see that Paul came to realize that there is purpose. Someone say purpose. There is purpose for the problems. There's purpose for his suffering. And he realized this. He realized that problems and suffering helps us remember what God and Jesus went through on the cross. When we suffer, we remember how much Jesus suffered for us. When we go through problems and issues, it really helps us keep us humble. Okay, when we go through those struggles and hurts, this is huge. It helps prove our faith to other people around us. I mean, that's big. It's easy to believe in God when things are good, but it's harder to believe in God when things are falling apart. And so when we have struggles and issues and we're still believing and praising God, man, that proves to the people around us that our faith is real, our God is real. And so those struggles and those hurts and problems have a purpose because they can prove your faith to the people around you. And Paul also realized that those struggles and hurts really give God an opportunity to show off his power. And so we're going to jump in. We're going to jump into Paul's story. And we're going to see that Paul is being persecuted. That just means that he's being bullied by all these people just because he believes in God. And people's wondering, why do you still talk? Why do you still talk about God? And this was his response. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 13, it says this. It says, "We continue to preach because we have the same kind of faith the psalmist had when he said, 'I believed in God, so I spoke.'" I believe in God, so I spoke. Man, the first thing that we can do to show that our story gives God glory in our lives is talk about God. That's the first thing. We need to talk about God. If God is part of our story, we need to talk about God. People ask, why do you talk about God? Well, I believe in God. That's why I talk about God. Just like our GWAM. Once you figured out that solution and combination and rock, paper, scissors, man, you're telling your whole team about it. Why? Because you found the solution. Man, when we find God and when we realize that God is the solution to a lot of our problems and issues in our life, we shouldn't be able to not talk about God. We should be able to want to share God, talk about God, tell people that, hey, this is the answer. And so we need to talk about God if we want to give God glory for our story. But it doesn't just end there. Okay, Paul doesn't just talk about God, but he also lives his life for God. It says this in chapter 5, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 13. It says this. It says, "If it seems we are crazy, it is to bring glory to God. And if we are in our right minds, it is for your benefit." Either way, Christ's love controls us. He's saying either way, Christ's love controls us. What he's saying is, whatever we do, whether you think we're crazy or you think that we are fine in our mind, that no matter what, God's love is what controls our actions. That we live for God. We need to speak about God. And point number 2 is we need to live for God. We need to live for God. You know, growing up and in high school, I did a lot of videos and a lot of media. And I always heard 2 different things from 2 different types of teachers. In my English class, I always heard my teacher say, hey, don't show it, tell it. Right? Like they're saying, don't just give like a little small description of it. Really explain and tell and describe it. But in my media class, my teacher said, hey, don't tell it, show it. He's saying, don't put a line in your script that says, I love you. Show on screen with emotion and actions that person loves that person. And so on one side, I heard, don't show it, tell it. And on another side, I heard, don't tell it, show it. But when our story really becomes God's glory, we realize that we need to tell it and show it. See, to the people close in our lives, we have the opportunity to really share and speak and talk and tell them about God. But there's also going to be people in our lives that just know us by passing us in the hallway. Maybe they just know us from that one encounter at a gas station or that one encounter playing basketball. And we won't ever really have a conversation with them. But they're going to be able to see our actions. This reminds me of a time where I was at the junkyard. And the junkyard is where all these cars are, like, they're totaled. And so you can go and you can look for car parts and you can go and you can purchase parts for cheap. And so I was looking for a new bumper for my green Honda Element. And I thought, there's no way that there's going to be a green. I mean, my green is a pretty unique type of green for my car. There's no way there's going to be a green Honda Element in this junkyard. But, you know, I was like, whatever, I'm just going to go and I'm going to look and see if there's anything that I can find. And maybe I can find an orange one and just replace the bumper, and my bumper will be orange, my car will be green, it's going to be epic, cool. So I go to this junkyard and I'm walking around, and it's like a beam from heaven shining on this car out in the corner. And guess what? It's a green Honda Element. And so I'm excited. I'm like, this is cool. This is awesome. I can't believe I found this exact same color. And so I go and I start taking off parts, and it's like, man, it's totaled, but the few good parts is the parts I need. I mean, the bumper was good, the hood was good, it's cool. And so I'm taking apart parts, and as I'm doing this, there's a guy kind of like walking around my car, not really close to me, but kind of a distance. And he would walk around the junkyard and would kind of come back. I mean, and this guy was if I'm honest, he was kind of scary looking. I mean, he looked like he was looking for trouble. He had, a white tank top on, his hands in his pockets, looking around. And so, I mean, I counted maybe 3 or 4 times that he's coming around my car that I'm taking apart. And so I'm thinking, oh no, I'm by myself. No one's with me. Like, I have my toolbox. I'm trying to look like, what can I use, to defend myself and if anything happens. And so finally, like, I'm taking apart this hood, and he comes up to me and he says, hey, like, hey, what's up? Right? And he's asking like, hey, what you doing? And so I'm just kind of start talking to him, and we start having this conversation. And all of a sudden, he just starts opening up to me. And he's talking about all his problems. He has problems with his wife and his kid, and they have to go to court. And he has anger issues, and I'm like just trying to stay happy and positive, right? And he's just pouring out his heart. And so I say, hey, well, I mean, I don't know where you are, but for me, I believe in God. And I start sharing about my faith and about some people in the Bible. And this man that looks scary, I mean, he looks like he could kill me. He just starts crying. He starts crying and he starts crying. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, do I hug him? Like, but I just keep sharing, and I keep sharing and telling him about God's love and God's story in my story. And then he says this, right before he leaves me, he says this that really changed my perspective, because I thought, okay, God, you allowed me to tell your story. You allowed me to tell your story. But when he said this, God really showed me that I showed God's love before I even spoke God's love. See, the guy, as he was kind of composing himself, he was getting up to leave and dust off. He said, I'm so sorry, bro. I'm so sorry. He's talking all pigeon. I'm so sorry. I don't know. I mean, I never heard stuff like that before, and I so appreciate this conversation. And then he said this. He said, and to be honest, I kept circling around you. I just kept walking and coming back, because as I was walking, it was like there was just this light around you, and I was just drawn to you. And I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if that sounds weird, but it was just like I was drawn to you. And it was almost like I could just feel God's love. There's situations that you're going to need to tell it. There's situations that you're going to need to show it. But there's going to be situations in your life that you're going to need to tell and show God's love to bring Him glory. So as we close tonight, let's close our eyes, let's bow our heads, let's prepare our hearts for what God is going to do tonight as we welcome up your house party leader to close us in prayer.